6:36, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. I'm texting 6443 back because 6443 is accusing me of being a Kamala supporter. I told 6443 to go ahead and get back on her meds or his meds. I don't know, man, woman, whatever. But somehow I'm a Kamala supporter, and I'm not really certain why. I'm asking, so why exactly is it that you're calling me a Kamala supporter? And I think part of what she's saying is because I talk about the polls, and I have at times taken exception with Donald Trump's inability at times to stay on message. And if that makes me not a Donald Trump supporter, well, then you've got a very strange way of identifying a Kamala supporter or saying somebody is not a Trump supporter. See, don't you tell people who you like or you love if they're off track? Don't you do that?
Oh, definitely.
Of course. Because I don't want to be sitting here the day after the election, and I can't just be sitting here for the next 3 months saying, oh, Trump is great, Trump is great, Trump is great, and there's absolutely nothing to worry about, and then he loses. And then people look at me and they're going to say, well, either you've been lying to us or you don't know what the hell you're talking about. So all I'm trying to say is you have to pay attention to both candidates to make sure that you know what everybody's doing. I am a Trump supporter. I appreciate everything that Donald Trump does. I think that well, not everything. Some of the things he says drives me nuts because it takes his eye off the ball. But most things I like that Donald Trump does when it comes to policy. Now, the question is, and this is where my buddy Matthew Hurtt comes in. So, Matthew, let me ask you, the New York Times, I'm going back and forth with somebody who says that both Brian Wilson and I are closet Kamala fans. I know, and she's saying, well, you're being overcritical of Donald Trump. I don't think I'm being overcritical by saying the man needs to stay on message. And I also think, and people, I got criticized last week by a couple of folks because I was talking about some of the polling that is out there showing that Kamala Harris is, doing well. Of course, you and I both know, because you and I have talked about this before, that, the polling companies, they've been wrong many times, but when you see all the polls going in a certain direction, then I think there's probably some truth to them. That's number one. But number two, I got to ask you about the New York Times poll that came out over the weekend that shows that Kamala is ahead by 4 points in 3 battleground states. I think it's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and, I forgot what the last one was. Do you remember the New York Times poll?
Dan, it is to talk about these polls in aggregate. Polling is not a science. It's half art, and as I've said on this show a million times, one poll is just a snapshot in time, but a series of polls tell a story. And even if the polling is off in the New York Times poll, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is a trend of polls which tell a story. And I think to your point, we saw J.D. Vance do a ton of great interviews over the weekend. He really came into his own, and that interaction with Dana Bash was peak Republican messaging on national television, and that is what Republican voters need, and that is what moderates and independents and undecided people need. The people who have been with Donald Trump since he came down the escalator are on board, and they're going to light up the super text line anytime that you ask a tough question. But it is important for us to ask those tough questions because we've seen the stark contrast now with J.D. Vance over the weekend and with Donald Trump. And I can't tell you how many, as the chairman of a local Republican party, how many women in particular have called me over the last few weeks and said, I just wish Donald Trump would stay on message. And it is not hurtful. It is not rejecting the campaign to say, wouldn't it be great if Donald Trump could stick to no tax on tips, could stick to securing the southern border, could stick to strengthening America at home and abroad, and nudging him in that direction. And I think it is absolutely acceptable for people like me and for people like you with a large audience to ask those questions and try to nudge the president in the right direction to where he's on message, and his message of American prosperity and of strength abroad resonates, and that people actually hear it, and they want to buy into it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. By the way, it's Wisconsin. So you have Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. New York Times saying that Kamala Harris is up by 4 in each of those states. I don't buy that one, though. I mean, I don't think it has shifted that much. I think that might be an outlier because most of the other polls, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not exactly a poll watcher, but what confuses me is that you have a failure to connect where the American people still believe that America is on the wrong track. It doesn't compute within how is it that they believe that America's on the wrong track, yet they're so supportive of Kamala Harris, who was one part of Biden-Harris, who have completely shanked the country, and it is on the wrong track. It's like something's not connecting here.
You're right about that, Dan. Again, many people aren't paying it. A lot of people don't pay attention until August, September, October. And if you did a man on the street interview 6 months ago, half of people couldn't even tell you who the vice president was. And now people are cluing in. And as I said, at least a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the national media, the big news stations, ABC, NBC, CBS, whomever, dropped essentially a multi-$100 million in-kind ad buy where all they've said is Kamala, she's doing a great job. This is history making. But again, that J.D. Vance interview, especially with Dana Bash, where he said, Kamala Harris has not sat down with a substantive interview. The only substantive policy position she's announced is one that Donald Trump announced months ago, this no tax on tips, which is carried by Congressman Thomas Massie in northern Kentucky. And so she has no policy positions of her own, but what we do have is a history of her being on the wrong side of the issue and announcing, now that she has to appeal to a broader electorate, announcing that she has somehow shifted her entire ideology in the span of 2 or 3 weeks, from the most progressive or the most liberal U.S. senator, according to nonpartisan ratings of U.S. senators, to now this secure the border, strong economy candidate. And it is up to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Republicans to draw that contrast and prove it to the American people as they begin to clue in to this election cycle.
It is kind of weird, isn't it, Matthew, because this is a man who the Democrats have said his policies are dangerous. He's a threat to democracy. Yet now they're starting to steal his policies. And that's why hashtag copycat Kamala is trending this morning, because, and if you missed the 5 o'clock hour, and I think I may have mentioned it in the opening monologue here in the 6, is that she came out finally with some sort of a concrete policy plan, no taxes on tips. And as everyone knows, if you listen to this show, that's something that Donald Trump has been talking about for at least 6 weeks. What I find interesting, though, is that people are pointing out that, and this is not a shock, but it looks like she's lying. Kamala Harris's first big policy idea, stealing Donald Trump's no taxes on tips. However, she backed the Democrats $80 billion for more IRS audits, including on tip income. The Biden-Harris administration also launched a new IRS crackdown on tips, getting the IRS inside the door at bars and restaurants to directly monitor tips at the cash register at the point of sale, as they say. But I guess the truth doesn't matter, does it?
This is absolutely Orwellian, and I think this is what we're going to see all the way through Election Day. We cannot trust what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are saying on the campaign trail, and it is going to be up to voters and to stations like this one to again, draw that contrast and to tell the truth about their record. Politicians will say anything to get elected, and this is Democrat politicians, Republican politicians, anybody at all will say anything that the voters want to hear to get elected, but you really have to look at their record. And when it comes to empowering the IRS, when it comes to a regulatory infrastructure that from $600 transactions on your electronic transfer apps, anything that you use, Cash App or anything like that, all of those policies that put a microscope on the microfinances of the American people, those $2, $3 tips at the coffee shop, the 15% or 20% tip at the restaurant, or a $600, me gifting somebody for helping me move into my apartment, all of those are under the microscope thanks to the Biden-Harris administration and thanks to 80,000 new IRS agents. And the proof is in the pudding. They said that those 80,000 IRS agents would go after millionaires and billionaires, and the number one victim of the increased power of the IRS is always middle-class Americans, and it has been proven out over the last few months. Audits and all of those, I would say, retaliatory acts by the IRS have been taken out primarily against middle-class and working-class Americans.
Well, and so you couple the fact that they want to eliminate Donald Trump's tax cuts in 2025. You couple that with, of course, the higher prices for, just about everything. You still go to the grocery store, stuff is still more expensive. And there's no doubt that our paychecks are worth a lot less. And if Kamala Harris gets elected, Lord help us, then she's going to allow those tax cuts to expire. And I don't see the economy or the cost of things getting any better. So we're really going to be out even more money if they're elected. I think that for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, on this particular point, I think this is a point that they just cannot hammer enough, because she is on record as saying that she wants to eliminate the Trump tax cuts.
That is exactly right. And people think about, okay, let's raise the capital gains tax from 15 to 35%, which is what she's proposed. It's even more radical than Joe Biden's proposal. And a lot of people don't think that many Americans have retirement accounts, but a majority of Americans have at least $5,000 in some kind of retirement investment account. So that's going to hit most Americans. And then the individual tax rates are going to kick in. They're going to ratchet back up to their pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act levels, and that's going to cost the American family thousands of dollars a year, and that's thousands of dollars they can't put toward retirement, they can't put toward the mortgage, they can't put toward groceries. And I saw a pretty funny meme this morning was, Kamala Harris promised to bring down the cost of groceries once she's elected president.
Yeah.
Well, she's currently in the White House now. What are the policies that the Biden-Harris administration are doing to bring down the cost of groceries? And that is to say there is nothing they are doing. All of these spending policies, all of these taxing policies lead to higher cost and a pinch in the pocketbook of all Americans, but especially working class Americans.
Matthew, you are going to be speaking at an event. Is it not obviously today, but is it next Monday or Tuesday you're doing an event here in Nashville?
Next Tuesday on the 20th, I'm very excited to join my friends, the Sentinels. They're a constitutional conservative group. They meet in Franklin, so it's Tuesday the 20th at, I believe, 6:30 p.m. at the Hyatt House. That's on Mallory Lane, right off 65. And that's at 6:30, and it's a great opportunity to get back and to see my family, and also to gather with several dozen, perhaps even 100 conservative activists who are looking to plug their efforts into actionable things they can do to make a difference in Middle Tennessee. So I'm very excited to join them next Tuesday.
Is this kind of thing that people can, if they want to go and hear you speak, can they do that?
They absolutely can. I spoke to the organizer over the weekend. Great guy. He's been at this for quite a while, and he said this would be open to the public. So let's pack out the room at the Hyatt House on August 20th at 6:30 p.m. I'll be there telling stories, taking questions, and firing up constitutional conservative activists.
For folks who haven't heard Matthew speak, it's actually very entertaining and a lot of great information as well. Is there a website people can go to get more information?
I don't have an updated website for them, but I will be back. I should be in town next week, and we may do one of these, Dan, in studio for the first time in a few months, and I will get information out. However, your listeners can find me on Twitter at Matthew Hurtt, MattheWHurtt, and I will provide more information as it becomes available to me.